The siren wailed 3 times before shutting off abruptly, signaling the start of combat ecology class at Varthos Academy. Kale Draven entered the training arena last, his broad shoulders and scarred forearms drawing stares from the other cadets. They always stared. A Jarkun Deathworlder among them was like finding a wolf among domesticated dogs, fascinating, terrifying, and wholly out of place. "Gladiator," someone whispered as he passed. Kale pretended not to hear. The word followed him like a shadow, even 2 years after escaping the blood-soaked fighting pits of Jarkun. He took his position at the back of the formation, where he could observe everything without being surrounded by too many bodies. Old habits died hard. Instructor Varner stood at the center of the circular training pit, her 7-foot frame towering over most of the cadets. Her metallic exoskeleton gleamed under the harsh lights, enhancing her already impressive physique. The Varthos training ground was state-of-the-art, walls lined with containment modules, floor panels that could reconfigure to simulate various terrains, and atmospheric controls that could mimic conditions from any known planet in the Federation. "Today," Varnor announced, her voice amplified through the arena, "we study apex predators from Class X death worlds." Her elongated fingers swept across her datapad. "As future warriors and peacekeepers of the Federation, you must understand what you might face on hostile planets." Kale felt his muscles tense. Class X death worlds, like Jarkun, the planet that had forged him into a weapon, then tried to break him apart. "We'll begin with specimen analysis," Varnor continued. "I've prepared a holographic display of—" The instructor paused, frowning at her control panel. Something was wrong. The central platform was supposed to project a 3-dimensional image of whatever creature they were studying. Instead, a loud mechanical grinding sound echoed through the chamber. "System malfunction," Varnor muttered, tapping frantically at her controls. "The projection system isn't responding, but the containment protocols are—" The grinding noise grew louder, and the floor beneath them trembled. Kale recognized the sound immediately. A containment pod was being raised to the surface. Not a hologram, a real specimen. "Everyone back!" Kale shouted, his combat instincts overriding protocol. Most cadets hesitated, looking to Varner for confirmation. But it was too late. The central platform split open, and a transparent containment field shimmered into existence. Inside it prowled a creature from Kale's nightmares. The Jarkun Ravager, known colloquially as the Predator among off-worlders, stood nearly 10 feet tall on its hind legs. Its 6 limbs ended in hooked claws that could tear through battle armor. Its elongated head housed multiple rows of serrated teeth, and the mottled exoskeleton covering its body was nearly impervious to conventional weapons. 2 sets of eyes, one pair for daylight hunting, another for nocturnal tracking, scanned the room hungrily. "Containment breach!" Varnor shouted, finally recognizing the severity of the situation. "Emergency protocols! Everyone evacuate to—" The Predator roared, the sound so powerful it vibrated through Kale's bones. Then it lunged against the containment field. The transparent barrier flickered once, twice, and shattered. Screams erupted as cadets scrambled for the exits. The Predator crouched low, predatory eyes tracking the movement, calculating which prey to take first. Kale didn't run. Something deeper than training kept him rooted to the spot. Memories of fighting these beasts in the gladiatorial pits, of watching his fellow fighters torn apart when they showed fear. The Predator hunted by movement and fear pheromones. The more the cadets panicked, the more frenzied it would become. "Stop running!" Kale shouted, but his voice was lost in the chaos. The Predator chose its first target, a young Taurian cadet who had tripped in his haste to escape. The beast pounced, covering half the training pit in a single bound. Kale moved without thinking. His body remembered what to do even as his mind raced to form a plan. He sprinted forward, snatching a training staff from a weapons rack as he passed. "Hey!" he roared, striking the metal floor with the staff. The sound rang out, sharp and distinct from the general chaos. The Predator halted mid-pounce, its head swiveling toward the new sound. It recognized a challenge when it heard one. Its primary eyes locked onto Kale, pupils dilating with predatory focus. "That's right," Kale muttered, twirling the staff. "Remember me? Your kind and I are old friends." The creature tilted its head, almost as if it understood. Then it charged. Kale had fought enough predators to know their patterns. They began with a feint, a lunge that pulled back at the last second to gauge the prey's reaction. He held his ground until the beast was almost upon him, then rolled to the side with practiced precision. The predator's claws slashed through empty air. "Everyone out!" Kale shouted to the remaining cadets. "Seal the doors behind you!" Most obeyed. But Kale noticed two figures moving against the flow of bodies. Aratala, the slight, blue-skinned technological engineer, was pulling something from her pack. Beside her stood Rowan Kez, Kale's only real friend at the academy. "We're not leaving you," Rowan called, his forearms already reaching for training weapons. "This isn't a classroom exercise," Kale shouted back, narrowly avoiding another swipe from the predator. "Exactly why you need help," Ira replied, her voice calm despite the chaos. She had deployed some kind of device on the floor, its lights blinking rapidly. The predator circled Kale, growling low in its throat. It was measuring him now, recognizing that he wasn't ordinary prey. Kale could see the intelligence in its eyes. The Ravagers weren't mindless beasts but calculating hunters. It would adjust its tactics, become more cunning. Instructor Varnor had positioned herself by the door, urging the last cadets through. "Draven, abandon the arena! That's an order!" Kale ignored her. If the predator escaped into the academy hallways, the death toll would be catastrophic. The beast could smell his familiarity with Jarkun, prey that knew its kind too well. It wouldn't let him escape now. The predator suddenly lunged toward the ceiling, using its powerful limbs to propel itself onto one of the overhead lighting fixtures. The metal groaned under its weight. "It's trying to get above us," Kale warned. "They hunt from elevation when possible." Ira nodded, adjusting something on her device. "I'm trying to reconfigure the emergency containment system, but I need time." "How much?" Rowan asked, positioning himself between Era and the creature. 3 minutes, minimum." "We don't have 3 minutes," Kale said grimly. The predator proved him right by ripping the lighting fixture from the ceiling and hurling it toward them. Sparks showered the arena as Kale and Rowan dove in opposite directions. Era barely managed to protect her device, curling her body around it as debris rained down. The training pit was now half in shadow, giving the predator the advantage with its nocturnal vision. It dropped back to the floor, sending tremors through the metal plating, and began stalking toward Era. "No!" Kale shouted, striking his staff against the ground again. "I'm your opponent!" The predator hesitated, torn between the easier prey and the challenging one. Kale needed to make himself the only target worth pursuing. He reached for the memories he'd tried so hard to bury, the techniques that had kept him alive in the pits of Jarkun when everyone else died. He drew a deep breath and released a sound from deep in his chest, a guttural, primal roar that echoed through the arena. Not human, not civilized, but the raw challenge of one apex predator to another. The Ravager's reaction was immediate. It spun toward him, hackles raised, all 6 limbs tensed for combat. Kale had just declared himself not prey, but rival. "Kale, what are you doing?" Rowan whispered, horrified. "Buying time," Kale replied, not taking his eyes off the predator. "Get Era what she needs." The beast charged, but this time there was no feint. It committed fully to the attack, all 6 limbs working in terrible coordination. Kale dodged the first swipe but couldn't avoid the secondary strike from its lower limbs. Claws raked across his side, tearing through his uniform and drawing blood. Pain lanced through him, but Kale embraced it, used it. Pain had been his teacher for years. He spun the staff and landed a solid blow to the creature's neck joint, one of the few vulnerable spots in its armor. The predator shrieked, more in rage than pain, and redoubled its attack. Kale found himself driven back, closer to the wall, his options diminishing. Blood loss would slow him soon. "Ira!" he called out. "1 more minute." Too long. The predator sensed his weakening and pressed its advantage, herding him into a corner. One of its claws caught the training staff, snapping it in half. Kale was left with only a jagged metal stub. Memories flooded back. The roar of the crowd in the fighting pits. The metallic smell of blood on sand. The faces of fellow gladiators who hadn't survived. The weight of their deaths pressed down on him, threatening to break his focus. "Not today," he muttered to himself. Not like this. From the corner of his eye, he saw Rowan attempting to distract the predator by throwing debris at it from behind. The creature's secondary limbs lashed out blindly, catching Rowan across the chest and sending him flying into a weapons rack. "Rowan!" Era cried out, momentarily looking up from her work. That split second of distraction was all the predator needed. It abandoned Kale and charged toward Era and her device, recognizing it as the true threat. Kale had one chance. He reached to his belt and unclipped his survival pack, standard issue for all cadets. Inside was a compact emergency shelter, no bigger than his fist when compressed, but designed to expand into a protective dome in hostile environments. He activated it and threw it directly into the predator's path. The shelter deployed instantly, expanding into a semi-rigid dome 5 meters in diameter. The predator crashed into it at full speed, momentarily confused by the sudden obstacle. The dome wasn't designed to withstand such force. It began to tear almost immediately, but it bought precious seconds. "Now, Ira!" Kale shouted. Ira slammed her hand down on her device. The floor panels around the predator lit up with pulsing energy. A new containment field began to form, this one emanating from the floor rather than from a central pod. The predator sensed the trap and leaped away, but the field expanded faster than it could move. Within seconds, it was encased in a shimmering energy barrier that contracted around it, forcing the creature into a more confined space. "I've rerouted the emergency containment system," Era explained, her voice shaking with adrenaline. "But it's not stable. The field will collapse if—" The predator roared in fury, hurling itself against the energy barrier. The field flickered dangerously. "It's going to break through," Rowan groaned, pulling himself to his feet despite his injuries. Kale saw the fractured staff in his hand, the wounded creature trapped in an unstable field, and his injured friend. The arena doors remained sealed. The emergency protocols had locked down the entire training pit. Help would come eventually, but not soon enough. They needed to subdue the predator permanently. "The ceiling," Kale said suddenly, looking up at the exposed circuitry where the lighting fixture had been torn away. "Ira, can you channel the containment field's energy through that electrical conduit?" Ira followed his gaze and nodded slowly. "Yes, but it would overload the system. We'd lose the containment field entirely." "For how long?" 3 seconds, maybe 4 before the backups engage." "That's enough." Kale turned to Rowan. "I need you to hit that junction box with something conductive when Era gives the signal." "What are you going to do?" Rowan asked. Kale looked at the raging predator, then down at his own bloody side. "What I was trained to do." Before either could protest, Kale moved closer to the containment field, just out of reach of the predator's claws. The beast focused all its attention on him, sensing an opportunity. "Ira," Kale called, not looking away from the creature's eyes. "On my mark." He raised the broken staff, holding it like a spear. The predator matched his stillness, muscles coiled, ready to spring the moment the barrier dropped. "Now!" Ira's fingers flew across her device. The containment field wavered and vanished. At the same instant, Rowan hurled a metal training weight at the exposed junction box. Electricity arced through the air as the circuit overloaded. The predator lunged at Kale, jaws wide, victory in its predatory eyes. Kale didn't try to avoid it. Instead, he stepped into the attack, thrusting upward with the jagged end of the staff. But at the last possible moment, he released the weapon and threw his body sideways. His right hand shot out in a movement so practiced it was almost unconscious, the Gladiator's air punch. A strike designed to land precisely at the gap between the predator's armored plates. His fist connected with the soft tissue of the creature's throat just as the electrical surge reached them. Pain exploded up Kale's arm as the current passed through both him and the predator, but he maintained the strike, driving his fist deeper into the vulnerable spot. The predator convulsed, more from the precision strike than the electricity. Its charge faltered, momentum carrying it past Kale to crash into the far wall. It slumped to the ground, not dead, but stunned. Its neuromuscular system temporarily overloaded. The backup containment system engaged, encasing the subdued creature in a new energy field. Kale collapsed to his knees, his right arm hanging useless at his side, burns spreading across his skin where the current had entered his body. The world swam before his eyes, darkness creeping in at the edges of his vision. The last thing he saw before consciousness fled was Era and Rowan rushing toward him, and beyond them, the sealed doors of the training pit sliding open to admit emergency responders. "Hold on, Gladiator." Rowan's voice seemed to come from very far away. "The fight's over. You won." Then darkness claimed him entirely. Kale dreamed of Jarkun. Not the fighting pits, for once, but the wilderness beyond the human settlements, the twisted forests where vegetation grew in metallic hues, where the air itself seemed alive with microscopic predators. He was running, not in fear but in harmony with the deadly environment. His body remembering what his civilized mind tried to forget. He was a child of that merciless world. A voice pulled him from the dream. Neural patterns stabilizing. He's coming around. Kale opened his eyes to the stark white ceiling of the Academy's medical bay. The antiseptic smell burned his nostrils after the vivid sensory memory of Jarkun's toxic atmosphere. "Back with us, Cadet?" asked a calm voice. Dr. Ilara Voss leaned over him, her scaled fingers checking the monitors beside his bed. The Saurian physician had treated Kale before, after training injuries that would have hospitalized other cadets for weeks. "The Predator," Kale managed, his throat raw. "Did it?" "Contained and sedated," Dr. Voss assured him. "No casualties, though not for lack of trying on its part." Relief washed through him. Then another thought. Era and Rowan? Minor injuries, already treated and released. The doctor's reptilian eyes blinked slowly. "You, however, suffered significant electrical burns, a dislocated shoulder, 3 broken fingers, and enough toxin exposure from the predator's claws to kill most species." Kale flexed his right hand experimentally. The pain was there but dulled by medication. "How long was I out?" 17 hours. The Academy Council has been waiting to debrief you." Kale struggled to sit up. "Then I should—" A firm hand pressed him back down. "You should rest. The Council can wait another day." But it couldn't, as it turned out. Less than an hour later, the medical bay doors slid open to admit Academy Director Theron, his imposing frame filling the doorway. Behind him came Instructor Varner, looking significantly less confident than she had in the training pit. "Cadet Draven," the director began without preamble. "You're awake. Good." Kale attempted to stand at attention, a reflex ingrained by military training, but Dr. Voss intervened. "He remains under medical observation. Director, any questioning will be conducted with the patient reclined." Theron frowned but nodded curtly. "Very well. Cadet Draven, explain the events in Training Pit 7. Kale recounted what had happened as clinically as possible, omitting the more visceral aspects of his confrontation with the Predator. When he finished, Director Theron's expression remained unreadable. "And you recognized the creature immediately, before Instructor Varner identified it?" "Yes, sir. I've encountered Jarkun Ravagers before." "In the gladiatorial pits," Varnor said, not quite managing to keep the distaste from her voice. Kale met her gaze steadily. "Yes, Instructor. That's where I learned their weaknesses." Director Theron paced the small room. "The containment breach has been traced to a critical failure in the security protocols. The system confused a demonstration hologram request with a specimen examination protocol." He paused, looking directly at Varner. "A failure that should never have occurred." Varnor stiffened. "Sir, I followed all standard procedures for—" "Evidently not." Theron cut her off. "A full investigation is underway." He turned back to Kale. "However, the immediate question is your status. Cadet Draven." "Sir?" "You disobeyed a direct order from your instructor to evacuate. You engaged an apex predator with inadequate equipment. You performed unauthorized modifications to Academy security systems with the assistance of 2 other cadets." The director's voice grew harder with each point. "By any standard interpretation of Academy regulations, these actions warrant severe disciplinary measures." Kale said nothing. He had known the consequences when he made his choices. "However," Theron continued, "these same actions prevented what could have been a catastrophic loss of life." The director's severe expression softened slightly. "The Council is divided on how to proceed." "If I may, Director." Dr. Voss interjected. "Cadet Draven's medical condition precludes any immediate disciplinary action. He requires at least 3 days of recovery before... That will be sufficient time for the council to reach a decision, Theron replied. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. For what it's worth, Draven, I believe you did what was necessary. Not all council members share my view. After they left, Cale sank back into the pillows, exhaustion overtaking him again. The painkillers Dr. Voss administered pulled him toward sleep, but his mind remained troubled. He had survived the Predator only to face a different kind of trial, one where the rules were less clear and victory less certain. As consciousness faded, he wondered if he would ever truly escape the arena. The second time Cale awoke, he found Era and Rowan sitting beside his bed. Rowan's upper right arm was in a sling, and Era had a bandage across her forehead, but otherwise they appeared unharmed. The Sleeping Beauty awakens, Rowan quipped, relief evident in his voice. Cale managed a weak smile. You look worse than I feel. Impossible, Era said, her tone serious despite the attempted humor. You're lucky to be alive. Cale, the electrical surge was far stronger than I calculated. It worked, though. Cale tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through his side. Has there been any word from the council? Rowan and Era exchanged glances. What? Cale demanded. They've been in session for hours. Rowan said carefully. The rumor is that some council members want to use this incident as justification to revoke your enrollment. Cale wasn't surprised. Since his admission to the academy 2 years ago, certain faculty members had been uncomfortable with his presence. A former gladiator from a Deathworld was too unpredictable, too dangerous to train alongside normal cadets. And you two? He asked. Are you facing disciplinary action? Nothing serious, Era assured him. We've been commended for supporting emergency containment efforts while simultaneously reprimanded for not evacuating. The punishment cancels out the reward. Bureaucracy at its finest, Rowan added with a grin. Cale studied his friends. Rowan, with his 4 arms and perpetual optimism, had been the first to approach him when he arrived at the academy. Era, brilliant and reserved, had joined their small circle later, drawn by Rowan's friendship and Cale's quiet intensity. They had stood with him against the Predator when they could have run. The realization humbled him. Thank you, he said simply, for staying. Era brushed away the gratitude with a wave of her slender blue hand. You would have done the same. In a heartbeat, Cale confirmed. But that doesn't make it less meaningful. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft chime from the medical bay doors. A junior administrator entered, looking nervous to find Cale awake and with visitors. Cadet Draven, she began formally. The council requests your presence for their ruling, if you are medically cleared, that is. Dr. Voss emerged from her office, frowning. He is not cleared for... It's all right, Doctor, Cale interrupted. I can manage. The Saurian physician looked skeptical but nodded reluctantly. Very well, but you will use a mobility assist, and I will accompany you. 30 minutes later, Cale stood before the Academy Council, his body supported by a medical exoskeleton that took the weight off his injured side. The council chamber was imposing by design, a semicircular dais where 7 senior administrators sat in judgment, with the accused standing alone on the chamber floor. Except Cale wasn't alone. Dr. Voss stood slightly behind him, a medical necessity that conveniently provided moral support. And at the back of the chamber, Era and Rowan had slipped in, defying protocol to witness the proceedings. Director Theron occupied the central seat. To his right sat the Hawks, council members who had opposed Cale's admission from the beginning. To his left were the more moderate voices, including Dr. Kelson, the Academy's chief xenobiologist. Cadet Cale Draven, Theron began, his voice echoing in the chamber. This council has reviewed the evidence concerning the incident in Training Pit 7. We have watched the security recordings, interviewed witnesses, and consulted experts on Jarkun fauna. Cale stood straight despite the pain it caused. Whatever their judgment, he would face it with dignity. The facts are not in dispute. Theron continued. You disobeyed a direct evacuation order. You engaged in combat with an apex predator. You encouraged 2 other cadets to remain in danger. You interfered with Academy security systems. Each charge hung in the air like a blade. However, Theron's voice softened slightly. These actions were taken in extraordinary circumstances, with the clear intent to protect Academy personnel, and with remarkable effectiveness. One of the Council Hawks, Administrator Vex, leaned forward. Intent does not negate the breach of protocol. Director, the cadets' actions, while successful in this instance, demonstrate a disturbing pattern of autonomous decision-making that undermines the chain of command. With respect, Administrator, Kale responded, choosing his words carefully. In combat situations, especially those involving Jarkun predators, conventional protocols can prove fatal. The Ravager would have escaped the training pit had standard evacuation procedures been followed. You presume to know better than Academy security protocols? Vex challenged. When it comes to Jarkun predators, yes, Kale said simply. I do. A murmur ran through the chamber at his boldness. Dr. Kelson spoke next, her voice thoughtful. Cadet Draven's experience with these creatures is unparalleled within the Academy. Perhaps the question isn't whether he violated protocol, but whether our protocols are adequate when dealing with Class X Deathworld fauna. An interesting perspective, Theron acknowledged, which brings us to the heart of our deliberation. He fixed Kale with an evaluative stare. Cadet Draven, your background is unique among our students. You survived conditions that would kill most sentient beings. You developed skills in the gladiatorial arenas that are, frankly, both impressive and concerning. Kale waited, unsure where this was leading. The question before this council is not merely disciplinary. Theron continued. It is whether your particular skill set belongs at this academy at all. So there it was, the fundamental doubt that had shadowed Kale since his admission. Was a Deathworlder Gladiator too dangerous? Too unpredictable to become a Federation peacekeeper? Director. Kale began, finding his voice despite the tightness in his chest. When I came to this academy, I brought with me everything I am, the skills forged in violence, yes, but also the determination to use those skills for something better than survival or entertainment. He gestured to his injuries. I could have escaped the training pit. I chose to stay because that's what Federation peacekeepers do. They protect others, regardless of personal risk. He looked directly at Administrator Vex. If that decision conflicts with protocol, then perhaps the protocol requires reassessment. Vex's face darkened, but before he could respond, the chamber doors slid open. A statuesque figure entered, Commander Lyra Solaris, a decorated Federation officer and Academy alumna. Her unexpected presence silenced the council members. Forgive my interruption, she said, striding forward to stand beside Kale. I was informed of this hearing and felt compelled to attend. Director Theron recovered first. Commander Solaris, while we welcome your presence, this is an internal Academy matter, with potential implications for Federation security, she completed smoothly. I've reviewed the incident reports. May I address the Council? Theron hesitated, then nodded. Commander Solaris turned to face the semicircle of administrators. Honorable Council members, I command the Federation Starship Horizon, currently tasked with diplomatic and peacekeeping missions in the Outer Rim. We regularly encounter hostile environments and dangerous indigenous species. She gestured toward Kale. What Cadet Draven demonstrated in that training pit wasn't recklessness. It was precisely the kind of adaptive thinking and specialized knowledge the Federation needs in its peacekeepers. Administrator Vex leaned forward. Commander, with all due respect, the cadet's background makes him inherently unpredictable. The gladiatorial conditioning is an asset, not a liability. Solaris interrupted firmly. I've lost officers because they lack the instincts this cadet possesses. The Federation is expanding into increasingly hostile territories. We need peacekeepers who understand those environments intimately. Her words hung in the air, challenging the Council's preconceptions. What exactly are you proposing, Commander? Theron asked carefully. A specialization program. Solaris replied without hesitation. Hostile environment response training, with Cadet Draven as its first student, and eventually, its instructor. The council chamber erupted in murmurs. Kale stared at Commander Solaris, stunned by the suggestion. She had just proposed not only clearing him of wrongdoing but elevating him to a teaching position. Director Theron raised a hand for silence. An interesting proposal, Commander. However, this council must first resolve the disciplinary matter at hand. He turned to his fellow council members. We will vote now on the matter of Cadet Draven's actions during the containment breach. The vote was closer than Cale expected, 4-3 in his favor, with Director Theron casting the deciding vote. Cadet Draven. Theron announced formally. This council finds that your actions, while in technical violation of Academy protocols, were justified by the extraordinary circumstances and ultimately saved lives. No disciplinary action will be taken. Relief flooded through Cale, but Theron wasn't finished. Furthermore, in light of Commander Solaris's recommendation and the clear need for specialized training in hostile environment response, we are establishing a pilot program for such instruction. He looked directly at Cale. You will complete your cadet training as scheduled, but will also begin developing a curriculum for this program under Commander Solaris's guidance. Administrator Vex looked displeased but resigned. I still maintain reservations about this course of action, but I will respect the Council's decision. Your reservations are noted, Administrator, Theron replied diplomatically. Now, if there is no further business. There is one matter, Commander Solaris interjected. The Jarkun Predator. What is to become of it? An uncomfortable silence fell over the chamber. Everyone knew the standard protocol for dangerous specimens that had attacked humans: termination and dissection. The creature is scheduled for euthanasia tomorrow. Dr. Kelson confirmed reluctantly. Standard procedure for Class X predators involved in incidents. Cale found himself speaking before he had fully formed the thought. That would be a waste. All eyes turned to him. Explain, Cadet, Theron prompted. The Ravager is an intelligent hunter, possibly the most effective predator in the known galaxy. Cale said, Killing it teaches us nothing about how to counter such threats in the field. What do you suggest? Dr. Kelson asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Containment and study. Cale replied, With proper security measures, real ones, not the compromised system that failed in the training pit, the Predator could be an invaluable teaching tool. You want to keep it alive after it nearly killed you? Administrator Vex sounded incredulous. It was doing what evolution designed it to do. Cale said simply, Just as I did what my training prepared me for. Neither of us chose our nature, but one of us can choose mercy. A heavy silence followed his words. Cale felt the weight of everyone's scrutiny, wondering if he had overstepped. If this final request would undo everything that had been decided. Then Dr. Kelson smiled. I believe this is precisely why Cadet Draven belongs at this academy. He understands these creatures better than anyone, yet advocates for their preservation rather than destruction. She looked at her fellow council members. I move that we approve Cadet Draven's request and establish a secure research facility for the Predator. The vote on this matter was unanimous. Even Administrator Vex concurred, though with the stipulation that security be overseen by a committee rather than a single individual. As the council adjourned, Cale found himself surrounded by well-wishers. Era and Rowan approached first, their faces alight with vindication. Not only cleared but promoted. Rowan marveled, clapping Cale carefully on his uninjured shoulder. You're full of surprises, Gladiator. The hostile environment program is brilliant, Era added. Will you be accepting students soon? I'd like to apply. Before Cale could respond, Commander Solaris joined their circle. Up close, her presence was even more commanding, intelligence and authority radiating from her like heat from a star. Cadet Draven. She greeted him formally, then softened. Or may I call you Cale? I feel we'll be working closely in the coming months. Cale is fine, Commander, he replied, still somewhat overwhelmed by the turn of events. What you did in that training pit was remarkable, she said. Not just the combat skills, those I expected from your record, but the way you integrated teamwork, used available resources, and most importantly, showed restraint when it would have been easier to kill. Cale glanced toward the chamber doors, where Director Theron was deep in conversation with Dr. Kelson. Not everyone sees it that way. They will. Solaris assured him. The Federation needs peacekeepers who understand violence intimately enough to know when not to use it. Your background gives you perspective that academy training alone cannot provide." She handed him a data chip. "My contact details and some preliminary thoughts on the program will be developing. Review them when you're recovered." After she departed, Dr. Voss insisted on returning Cale to the medical bay. His adrenaline was fading, and the pain of his injuries reasserted itself with a vengeance. As they made their way through the academy corridors, Cale noticed something different. The cadets they passed didn't avoid his gaze or whisper "Gladiator" behind his back. Instead, many nodded respectfully or offered words of support. "You're a hero now," Rowan observed, walking alongside the medical exoskeleton. "The Deathworlder who saved the academy." "Not a hero," Cale corrected him. "Just someone who did what needed to be done." "Isn't that the definition of a hero?" Era asked quietly. Cale had no answer for that. The concept of heroism had never featured in his life on Jarkun, where survival was the only virtue that mattered. The gladiatorial pits had taught him to fight, to kill, to endure, but not to protect or to show mercy. Those were lessons he had learned here, at the academy, from instructors who believed in duty and honor, from friends who stood by him when they could have run. Perhaps that was the true value of his unique background, not the combat skills forged in violence, but the appreciation for peace that only those who have known war can truly understand. Back in the medical bay, exhaustion claimed him quickly. As he drifted toward sleep, Cale's thoughts turned to the Predator, now secured in a proper containment facility rather than awaiting execution. Like him, it was a survivor of Jarkun. Like him, it had been brought to this place against its will, forced to fight when it would rather hunt freely. And like him, it had been shown mercy when destruction would have been easier. In that shared history, Cale found an unexpected peace. He had silenced the roar, not with greater violence, but with understanding born of shared experience. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a curriculum to develop, skeptics to convince, wounds both physical and psychological to heal. But for now, he allowed himself to rest, secure in the knowledge that he had found his place in the universe. Not as a gladiator fighting for others' entertainment, but as a teacher helping others survive. It was, he decided as consciousness faded, a worthy second life. 3 months later, Cale stood at the observation window of the newly constructed Xenobiology Research Center. Inside the reinforced habitat, the Jarkun predator prowled through an environment carefully designed to mimic its native terrain. Sensors monitored its movements, gathering data on its hunting patterns, sleep cycles, and neural activity. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Dr. Kelson said, joining him at the window. "We've learned more about Ravager physiology in 3 months than xenobiologists had discovered in decades." Cale nodded, watching the creature's fluid movements. Its wounds from their confrontation had healed, just as his had. The electrical burns on his right arm had left intricate scarring that Dr. Voss had offered to remove. But Cale had declined. Some marks were worth keeping. "Has it shown any sign of recognizing you?" Kelson asked curiously. "Every time," Cale replied. "It stops whatever it's doing and comes to the window. Watches me the way I watch it." "Fascinating. Some kind of predator-to-predator recognition?" "Something like that." Cale agreed, not elaborating further. The bond between him and the Ravager was difficult to explain to someone who hadn't experienced Jarkun firsthand. It wasn't friendship. The Predator would still kill him given the opportunity, but a mutual acknowledgement of shared origins. "Your first official class begins tomorrow," Kelson noted, changing the subject. "Nervous?" "Terrified," Cale admitted with a small smile. Fighting the Ravager was easier than teaching cadets about it. The Hostile Environment Response Training Program had attracted more applicants than anyone expected. What had begun as a specialized course for a handful of advanced cadets had expanded into a full curriculum with multiple instructors, though Cale remained the only teacher with first-hand gladiatorial experience. Commander Solaris had been right. As the Federation expanded its peacekeeping operations into more dangerous regions of space, the demand for personnel trained to handle hostile environments and indigenous predators had grown exponentially. "You'll do fine," Kelson assured him. "You know this subject better than anyone at the Academy." "Knowledge isn't the same as teaching ability." "True, but you have something else," Authenticity. When you speak about survival on a death world, the cadets know you've lived it. She glanced at her datapad. Speaking of which, I should let you prepare for tomorrow. Your classroom has been fully equipped as requested. After she left, Cale remained at the window a moment longer. The predator had noticed him and approached the transparent barrier, its multiple eyes studying him with predatory intelligence. Tomorrow I teach others about you, Cale said softly, knowing the creature couldn't hear him through the soundproof barrier. About respect, not fear. About survival without unnecessary killing. The predator tilted its head, almost as if it understood. Cale turned away and headed toward his quarters to finalize his lesson plans. As he walked, he passed groups of cadets in the corridors. Some were his future students, others simply curious about the Deathworlder instructor who had tamed a predator. They still called him Gladiator sometimes, but the word had lost its sting. It was part of who he was, not his whole identity, but a chapter in his story that had shaped him in ways both painful and valuable. In his quarters, Cale found Era and Rowan waiting. They had become his unofficial teaching assistants, helping him translate his intuitive knowledge of survival into structured lessons that Academy cadets could understand. Final preparations for tomorrow? Era asked, already pulling up holographic displays of their planned demonstrations. Just about ready, Cale confirmed, though I'm still not convinced the simulation will properly convey the speed of a Ravager's attack. That's why we have the real thing down in the research center, Rowan pointed out. For advanced students only, of course. Cale nodded, grateful for their support. What had begun as a solitary journey, the lone Deathworlder in an academy of more civilized species, had become a collaborative effort. His knowledge combined with Era's technical brilliance and Rowan's intuitive understanding of different learning styles had created something none of them could have achieved alone. I received word from Director Theron today, Cale mentioned as they reviewed the lesson materials. The Council has approved our proposal for a field study on Jarkun. Ira looked up sharply. They're actually letting students visit a Class X death world? A very limited expedition, Cale clarified. Senior cadets only, with extensive preparation and safety protocols, but yes, they've recognized that some things can only be properly learned in the field. Will you be leading it? Rowan asked. Cale nodded, a complex mix of emotions washing through him. He hadn't returned to Jarkun since his rescue from the gladiatorial pits. The prospect of going back, not as a prisoner, but as a teacher, stirred memories both dark and illuminating. Are you ready for that? Era asked gently, sensing his conflicted feelings. I don't know, Cale admitted. But it's necessary. The students need to experience a death world environment firsthand, in controlled conditions, before they might face one in crisis. And you? Rowan pressed. What do you need? Cale considered the question. What did he need? Not revenge against the world that had forged him through suffering. Not escape from the memories that still haunted his dreams. Perhaps what he needed was simpler. Closure. Or better yet, reconciliation. I need to see it differently, he said finally, not as a gladiator fighting to survive, but as a teacher helping others understand. Ira smiled. Then that's exactly what you'll do. Later that night, after his friends had left and his preparations were complete, Cale stood at the window of his quarters, looking out at the stars. Somewhere out there was Jarkun, the death world that had nearly broken him. And somewhere else were other hostile worlds where Federation peacekeepers might someday need the knowledge he could provide. He thought of the cadets who would file into his classroom tomorrow, eager to learn about survival in environments designed to kill. He thought of the predator in its research habitat, studied rather than destroyed. And he thought of his own journey from gladiator to teacher. The roar had been silenced, not through destruction, but through understanding. That, Cale decided, was the lesson he most wanted to impart. Not how to kill a predator, but how to respect one enough to learn from it and still survive. In the reflection of the window, he caught a glimpse of his scarred face and the academy instructor's uniform he now wore. The contrast between what he had been and what he had become was stark, yet there was continuity too. The Deathworlder Gladiator remained part of him, his experiences on Jarkun inseparable from the teacher he was becoming. Tomorrow, he would begin sharing those experiences with others, transforming personal survival into collective knowledge. It was, he realized, the most meaningful victory he had ever achieved, not silencing a predator's roar through combat, but through communion. Cale turned from the window and settled at his desk for one final review of his lesson plans. The past was set, but the future remained unwritten. And for the first time since leaving the gladiatorial pits, he looked forward to what that future might hold.